Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Major news out of Ottawa this morning. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled against Quebec's constitutional challenge of Bill C-92. That's the law that gives Indigenous communities full control over welfare services that affect their children and families. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
It was a day of bittersweet emotions, as Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for Quebec and Labrador, Ghislain Picard, pointed out at a press conference in Ottawa.
It's a very beautiful, a happy decision by the Supreme Court, but it is also, in a way, a sad day that the well-being and the future of these children has been an issue debated before the courts for the past 4 years and beyond.
The Supreme Court ruled against Quebec's challenge that Bill C-92 infringed upon the province's jurisdiction. In a more than 100-page decision, the court finds there's nothing that prevents the federal government from affirming Indigenous people's right to self-government as set out in Section 35 of the 1982 Constitution, and the Act is valid in establishing national standards that give Indigenous people control over their children's welfare. Also at the same press conference, Derek Montour of Ganawaki Community Services said the court decision confirms what Indigenous peoples have long known.
This ruling reiterates the message that we have been emphasizing for years, that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis are best placed to ensure the wellness of our own populations. Following today's decision, provincial governments and even the federal government no longer have any reason to abstain or discredit the legitimacy and competency of our governments.
Picard added First Nations have had a strained relationship with the province in recent years, but this is an opportunity to reset that relationship.
The fact that we are forced before the courts will certainly limit the good faith on our part, and we've always conveyed and believed in the position that our peoples have compromised enough. I think it's time now for other governments to do the same. I think that's the only way that trust and good faith will prevail.
Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu said at another press conference on Parliament Hill that it is a historic day, where Canada's top court ruled in favor of Indigenous people's inherent right to oversee and draft laws that affect their children's welfare.
This decision by the Supreme Court to uphold that inherent right, to recognize the legitimacy of federal law, to bolster that right and to place that right in Canadian law, I think is going to have tremendous impact across the country.
APTN News reached out to the Quebec government for comment. In an emailed statement, Minister of Social Services Lionel Carman's office says the dispute has never been between the government and First Nations and Inuit people, but with the federal government. It also says it will continue to work with First Nations and Inuit groups in the province, and that it will need time to analyze the Supreme Court's decision. It also says the interests of the children will always come first. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Thanks, Fraser. We're joined now by Cindy Blackstock, head of the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society. Blackstock is one of Canada's leading advocates for children and has her own history with the Supreme Court. Cindy, always awesome to have you with us. Just your initial reaction to this decision here today.
Well, this was an incredible victory for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit kids in that it affirmed the national standards and saying, look, no more harming kids in legislation and other policies with child welfare. All governments have to do better. That's a good thing. And then in addition to that, of course, affirming the decision-making of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children for their kids. All of this great decision, though, what I always say, it's a great dream, but to make it a reality, we got to make sure governments implement these things. And right now we have a non-compliance order, for example, against the Canadian government for breaching Jordan's principal orders. And so they need to bring their actions in alignment with this judgment and the requirements of the Act respecting First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children, youth, and families.
Yeah, Cindy, when you talk about implementation, I guess what would be the next steps here?
Well, I'm hoping that what we're going to be seeing is Canada actually affirming that First Nations laws have application across all provincial jurisdictions. There's been this tendency for them to say, well, it only applies in the province where the First Nation is. That should be out the window. Number two, they need to comply with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal orders fully so that those national standards are met for First Nations communities, and make sure that those hard-fought wins on Jordan's Principle and Child and Family are a baseline level of funding for First Nations, regardless of what jurisdictional model they want to achieve. Because the bottom line is every First Nation wants to make sure that their children grow up healthy and proud in keeping with those standards.
Cindy, what do you think this decision could mean to the average child in provincial care?
Well, it could mean that they no longer spend their childhoods trying to get basic rights that other kids enjoy. But that'll depend on the implementation of it. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more services to get at those core drivers of the overrepresentation. Things like poverty, poor housing, the trauma from colonialism that leads to addictions and domestic violence. Those are the big issues, Dennis, that we have to get at to make a big difference in the lives of children and their families. I'm hoping that this decision really breaks that open and gets people laser focused on that work. Because without it, sadly, we're going to see the overrepresentation continue, and that's not fair to kids.
Cindy, we'll have to leave it there. Always a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Hey, thanks so much, Dennis.
For more on the decision, we're joined by Bobby Narcisse, the Deputy Grand Chief of Nishnawbe Aski Nation, which represents 49 First Nations in Northern Ontario. Deputy Grand Chief Narcisse, thanks for being with us. This is a case you've followed closely. What does this decision mean to you?
Hello there. Yes, it's very important. Has very important ramifications to the First Nations that we serve at Nishnawbe Aski Nation, which is 49 communities across Treaty 5 and Treaty 9. It really, we've asserted that our children, our families are our jurisdiction, wherever they may reside. And this new ruling really supports that our inherent rights on children, youth, and families. So we welcome the Supreme Court's decision on this particular matter.
Deputy Grand Chief, you've spent a pretty good chunk of your life working with youth. What do you think this will be the impact on them?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that right now because we're at Thunder Bay. We have a Nishnawbe Aski Nation youth gathering going on right now. And I did, when the ruling came out, I was able to convey this message to our youth across Nishnawbe Aski Nation territory. And basically, it's an opportunity where, we strive to move ahead in terms of determining our own future with respect to revamping child and family services, not just protection, but also how do we support the families? How do we move from an era of apprehension to prevention and more or less preserving the family unit. And it's our young people and our young parents especially that we really hear this news that really asserts their inherent jurisdiction over their children as well. And we're very excited to work with our First Nations to start developing their own traditional laws, asserting their own traditional laws that they had in time immemorial, that is more reflective of their languages, of their culture, of their way of life. So we have a lot of work to do, and our youth are very excited as well because it's a long time coming. They're here, and they've been telling us all the challenges that they're facing, especially within the remote north. As you know, many of our communities are fly-in communities, and many of our young families have to leave our remote communities to access special needs services for their children, to access education services. So there's a lot of areas that we need to work on as a result of this new announcement.
Indeed. Deputy Grand Chief Narcisse, we'll have to leave it there, but appreciate you taking some time for us to talk about this.
No, thank you for having me. Miigwech.
To other news now, and the family of a man who died following an interaction with Winnipeg police in January is now speaking out. His parents hope his death highlights a need for systemic change and cultural training within law enforcement. Tamara Pimentel reports.
It's very hard to lose somebody in this way. It shouldn't have happened. There's no need for what they did to my son.
The parents of James Wood speak publicly for the first time since the 35-year-old father of 7 died following a Winnipeg police interaction 2 weeks ago. Carol and Brian Wood say police brutality and systemic racism led to their son's death. They are calling for justice.
As parents, we are living through a nightmare that no one should ever have to experience. Our beloved son, James, was a kind-hearted and loving individual, was taken from us in a horrifying and senseless manner.
A bystander recorded the incident on January 27th. In the video, James appeared to be unresponsive as police carry him to a cruiser. According to WPS, Winnipeg police were called by his girlfriend, who said James was intoxicated. Moments later, another caller said he collapsed outside in a parking lot. Police arrived soon after and restrained him. Witnesses told media they believe he had been tasered by police. James was taken to hospital, where he later died.
We continue to experience loss after loss, tragedy after tragedy. Our hearts are heavy. Our hearts are broken continuously.
James' aunt, Hilda Anderson Piers, has spent over 20 years advocating for Indigenous rights.
We've been victimized right from birth until we die by these systems of oppression. Enough is enough. I call on all levels of government to take meaningful action.
The Independent Investigative Unit of Manitoba is investigating the incident. James' body will be brought home to Opipinapawan Cree Nation over the weekend, where he will be laid to rest. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
There's been a major development in the court case involving the Gill sisters. Details on that and the Truth in Politics panel coming up after the break. Welcome back. Fraud charges against the twin sisters Amira and Nadia Gill for claiming Inuit status were dropped today by the Nunavut Court of Justice in Iqaluit. Trevor Wright explains what happened.
Charges against Amira and Nadia Gill were dropped today. Their mother, Karima Manji, pled guilty to defrauding the Kikitani Inuit Association, Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, and the Kakiavik Association of services and money over $5,000. Manji stated in an agreed statement of facts that her daughters didn't know their NTI cards were fraudulent. Amira and Nadia had official Inuit beneficiary status between February 2016 and March 2023. Between September 2020 and March 2023, the twins received over $150,000 meant for Inuit. In an agreed statement of facts, Manji stated Amira and Nadia are her birth children, but she enrolled them as Inuit in 2016, claiming that Kitty Noah of Iqaluit was the birth mother. The Iqaluit Community Enrollment Committee subsequently approved their Inuit status. Both daughters had that status removed in April 2023. The statement of facts also says Karima Manji herself applied for Inuit status in 2018, but was unsuccessful. Sentencing for Manji will be in the Nunavut Court of Justice on June 24th, 2024. Trevor Wright, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
The inquest into the mass stabbings on the James Smith Cree Nation is still fresh in our collective memory. Several First Nation communities are struggling with all kinds of violence, with several of those communities declaring a state of emergency. That was the topic this week for our Truth in Politics panel. Carrie Benjo is the editor of Eagle Feather News, and Niigaan Sinclair is a columnist at the Winnipeg Free Press. Carrie, Niigaan, thanks for being with us. Carrie, let's start with you. How big of a concern do you feel safety in rural and northern First Nations Indigenous communities are?
I think it is a major concern. Even just recently, I think it was Peter Ballantyne band had a news conference talking about the rates of violence happening on their community and how they need help. It is a huge community. It's the largest in the province, and they need assistance. And it's not just policing. It's not just, giving them a place to stay. It's everything. It's a lack of housing, a lack of, services available to those living on reserve. And I think, a lot of the problems that we experience in urban settings are now happening within rural settings. And I think something needs to be done, because there is no going home and going to be like, there's this idea that you're going to go home and it's going to be a safe place. If we don't keep that place safe, then where is home?
Yeah. Niigaan, we've seen First Nations, some, Yukon here as well, declare states of emergency when it comes to things like addictions and the fallout from that. Do you think a state of emergency is an effective way to address community safety?
It's often the last gasp effort to get attention on the issue. Put it this way, if you step on a nail in a city, you just simply drive down the street to your hospital, ER, even your general practitioner clinic, you'll be dealt with. There is dozens of services that are designed to be able to address what is a simple health issue. You do it on a First Nation, there's nothing. If the nursing station is open, you might access that. But the hours, 10, 20 hours that it takes for you to drive to a healthcare facility, never mind the 2 days that you need to wait in that facility to be able to be seen, you're taking a week out of your life that's away from your job, away from your kids, away from all the things that are going on within your community. And I'm just talking about stepping on a nail. I'm not talking about all the mental health services, crises that take years to escalate. I'm not talking about all the different things that involves, let's say, childbirth. Mm-hmm. So this is actually a taxpayer issue because what it means is that taxpayers are having to service under-resourced communities. And so this should be something that every Canadian should care about. But what First Nations are forced to do is call a state of emergency. And sometimes so many states of emergency actually tunes out Canadians. But Canadians should be caring about all these First Nations continually calling states of emergency from everything from basic healthcare needs to mental health crises, suicide crises, to just basic things like should our nursing station be open once a week?
Right. Carrie, what do you think the root causes of all of this are?
A lack of resources, a lack of infrastructure. Nigan mentioned taxes. We pay, like, the majority of Indigenous people, First Nations people live off reserve. Our taxes go to the province. None of those tax dollars filter back into First Nations communities. All the resources come directly from the federal government. There is a lack of financial contributions coming from the province, despite the fact that we have very large communities, First Nations communities within the province, and we move back and forth, and we're going to have an impact on the rest of society. And I think it's really unfair that there is no sharing of even our taxation dollars. You know, there's always this misconception that First Nations people don't pay tax dollars. They don't pay taxes. We get things for free. That's far from the truth. We pay a number of taxes, and I would like my tax dollars to go to help First Nations communities, whether it's in education, whether it's in health, anything that would benefit everybody. I think that's where our taxes should be divided, not cutting off these very large communities.
Nigan, how can we turn the tide on what we're seeing here with addictions and violence?
I think taking First Nations seriously. I actually think also urban Métis communities, other Indigenous communities that are happening in rural areas. I mean, taking seriously when leadership points out that we have a problem here, we have chronic neglect here, we have a long system, decades upon decades of under-resourced communities. Here's the reality, is that those young people, as Carrie points out, will be entering into society. Do we want those young people to be entering into healthcare systems, justice systems, child welfare systems, or do we want them to enter universities, workplaces, into developing businesses that all people in cities can benefit from, like hotels, like pharmaceutical companies, construction companies? I think it's obviously the latter. And so I think this is an issue that every Canadian should be caring deeply about, to make sure that the situation on First Nations, even just having basic roads that aren't potholes every spring, and that people cannot travel, so that when they do get that nail in a foot over an accident in a community, this isn't a life or death situation. This is something that every Canadian, whether you are a part of a First Nations, whether you are in a city, every single person in this country should have access to decent health care.
Carrie Nigan, we'll have to leave it there, but always appreciate your time. Time for another quick break still to come. Moose on the loose. Time now for our photo of the day. Eve Tidd shared her view near Jasper, Alberta, and we have to say that almost looks like a painting. All photos of mountains do to me. Amazing picture. Thanks for sharing, Eve. For the chance to be our next photo of the day, you can send those pictures to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, +2 for Halifax and Fredericton. -8 with snow in Kuujjuaq, flurries and 7 below in Nain. 8 above for Montreal, +7 in Val-d'Or. 0 with snow in Sault Ste. Marie, flurries and -3 in North Bay. -5 with snow in Thunder Bay, 8 below in Sioux Lookout. -13 for God's Lake and Thompson with snow. Snow and 4 below in Winnipeg and Dauphin. -8 with snow in Regina, Estevan, Swift Current, and Saskatoon. 8 below in Meadow Lake and the Ronge. In northern Alberta, 0 with snow in Peace River, 5 below and snow in Fort McMurray. 0 with snow in Edmonton, sun's out, and 0 in Lethbridge. 7 above in Vancouver and Victoria, 2 with snow in Kamloops. -3 with snow in Prince George, flurries and 4 below in Smithers. -19 in Old Crow, 0 with snow for Whitehorse. -12 in Yellowknife, 5 below in Norman Wells. -15 in Sax Harbor, 13 below with snow in Pawlatuck. -23 in Chesterfield and Whale Cove. 25 below in Resolute, -30 in Joe Haven. Canadian ski hills have had their fair share of challenges this year, but nothing like what interrupted this ski day in Wyoming.
Go faster!
That is a massive moose chasing skiers and snowboarders down the slopes in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The skier posting the video on social media saying that he didn't have a moose chasing them down the mountain on his bingo card. I was once chased by a moose down Highway 72 on my way to Sioux Lookout. It was scary stuff. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Friday. For news anytime and much more on today's Supreme Court ruling, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for being with us. I've got the Kansas City Swifties for the Super Bowl win. Have a great weekend.